What were once mere toys are now sophisticated machines dubbed drones at the forefront of aviation innovation, making strides in conservation, destruction, emergency response, agriculture, and beyond. The way the world looks now would be very different without these toy airplanes. RC planes started with humble origins. Back in the late 30s and early 40s, they were controlled without even a proportional control system, which meant that to go up or down, you'd simply flip a switch instead of this traditional proportional setup we're all familiar with today. It was max or nothing. Hell, even before that, they weren't even called RC planes. Electronically guided model aircraft were hydrogen-filled airships during the 19th century. These were flown around music halls as an act using a basic form of spark-emitted radio signal. But, of course, the military wasn't all that far off from capitalizing on the innovation. During World War II, the U.S. Army and Navy used radio-controlled planes they coined as radio planes, one word, as artillery target drones. Basically, they were used as target practice. But believe it or not, this wasn't the first instance. The earliest recorded use of an unmanned aerial vehicle for warfighting purposes dates back to 1849, serving as a balloon bomb carrier. Austrian forces attacking Venice tried to float 200 or so balloons carrying 24 to 30-pound bombs, which aimed to be dropped via a time fuse over Venice. Some were launched by land, and others were launched by an Austrian ship, the SMS Vulcano. At least one bomb fell in the city, but the Austrians blamed changing wind conditions on most of the balloons missing their target, with some even drifting back and exploding over Austrian lines. Britain worked on a project called Aerial Target that was a small radio aircraft first tested in March of 1917. Meanwhile, a year later, the Americans first flew their version, known as the Kettering bug, in October of 1918. While both were considered operational, neither were used in combat during World War I outside of training. Ever hear of the term drone before? We sure have. It was first used around 1935 when the British developed a number of RC aircraft to be used as targets for training purposes. During this time, the US was also using RC aircraft as target practice. While we know them as drones today, in the US, most were referred to as radio planes. This likely came from the first large-scale production, purpose-built drones being manufactured by Reginald Denny and his company named Radio Plane Company. His belief was that low-cost RC aircraft had a large market for training anti-aircraft gunners, and in as early as 1935, he demonstrated a functional prototype to the US Army, the RP-1. A few years later, he bought a design from Walter Reiter and began marketing it not only to the Army as the RP-2, but also to hobbyists as the Denny Mite. He continued to design up through the RP-4, which won Army contracts for its use during World War II. Nearly 15,000 radio planes were delivered. This was the first mass-produced drone in the US. Its primary purpose was target practice. The US wasn't the only country experimenting. Over in Japan, they were focusing on developing drone strikes in the US, and I'll bet you haven't heard about it until now. Well, in all honesty, the term drone might not be the best one, but they did launch long-distance attacks on the US mainland using Fugo unmanned balloons. The goal was to use the high-altitude jet stream and a ballast system to venture into the northwestern US, where they then aimed to cause forest fires and widespread panic. Over 9,300 balloons were launched from sites on coastal Honshu, of which only about 300 were found or observed in the US, Canada, and Mexico. The bombs were deemed ineffective as fire starters due to the damp seasonal conditions in northwestern America. Warfare wasn't the only purpose of the drones from this era. Ever heard of the B-17 Flying Fortress? 8 of them were converted into drones, with the purpose of collecting radioactive data. They were controlled on takeoff and landing from a transmitter operated by a man sitting in a Jeep. And in the air, they were controlled by another transmitter from another man sitting in another B-17. These were used during Bikini Atoll to gather samples of the radioactive cloud. During Test Baker, 2 of these B-17s were flown above the nuclear explosion, and both gained altitude when the shockwave reached them. The lowest of the 2 got damaged. Similar operations were conducted with Grumman F-6F Hellcat drones. Fun fact, one of these B-17 drones can be found today at the Davis Monthan Air Force Base under restoration. The first time that the drones we know of today saw combat on a large scale was during the Vietnam War around 1955. These weren't typical slap-a-bomb-on-a-DJI drones, but they were rather reconnaissance unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs. They got used in a range of new roles, from acting as decoys in combat to launching missiles against fixed targets, and even dropping leaflets for psychological operations. This was only the beginning. Fast forward to 1955, and the only spy plane available to the US was the U-2. Spy satellites were at least another year out, and the SR-71 was still a fantasy on paper. Concerns began ramping up about U.S. airmen being captured in communist territory. Within the year, during May, U-2 pilot Francis Gary Powers was shot down over the USSR. Focus then shifted to work on unmanned drones, and within 3 months of the downed U-2, codenamed Red Wagon was born. Red Wagon was a highly classified UAV program. The first drones produced under this program were the Ryan 147Bs, which piggybacked on C-130s. After their mission was complete, they'd deploy a parachute and would be recovered near Taiwan. During the Vietnam War, drones such as the varied models of the 147SC Lightning Bug flew over half of their mission over enemy territory. On average, each drone survived about 3 missions before it was lost. The most successful Lightning Bug was named Tomcat. It flew 68 missions before it was finally brought down from an enemy gunner. Following the Vietnam War, countries outside of Britain and the US started to explore drone technology. Efforts were focused on developing models with increased flight times, higher service ceilings, and more capabilities. Frankly, this is where their largest impact on the battlefield began. Attitudes toward UAVs during this time were often seen as unreliable and expensive toys. This changed drastically after the Israeli Air Force's victory against the Syrian Air Force in 1982. Israel used coordinated attacks against Syrian aircraft that destroyed them dozens at a time with minimal losses. During the Iran-Iraq War, the development of QM-1 began, and production started in 1985. M1 was used in multiple battles of the war, including Operation Karbala 5 and Operation Valahar 8. Some images show that Iran armed them with RPGs, but it's unknown if they were actually ever used in combat with that configuration. This was where we began to see a shift from using drones primarily for recon to many missions involving combat. After the September 11th attack on U.S. soil, the public got a front row seat to watching this shift take place. Most notably, an American UAV killed Qaid Salim Sinan al-Harithi, who was the alleged mastermind of the 2000 bombing of USS Cole in a November 2002 drone strike. 5 others were also killed. Over the next 24 years, we've been seeing a widespread commercial adoption of drones. Starting in 2006, the FAA granted its first certificate of authorization, which allowed for a drone to be used within U.S. civilian airspace to search for survivors of disasters. This followed a 2005 request that was denied, where some wanted them to be used to search for survivors from the Hurricane Katrina disaster. As of July of 2023, DJI drones alone estimated more than 1,000 lives have been saved by their technology. Sometime in 2006, the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol Agency began experimenting with several different models. They started with a fleet of MQ-9 Reapers to survey the U.S. border with Mexico. In just 6 months of service, surveillance led to an estimated 3,900 arrests and the seizure of 4 tons of marijuana. By 2014, the FAA approved its first commercial drone flight over land in Alaska, and the rest is pretty much history. While much of drones' use cases relied on war until recently, today, almost every industry you can think of uses drones in some capacity. Everything from agriculture, construction, real estate inspections, photography, hazmat, mining, surveying, search and rescue, all the way through entertainment, the list goes on. As of 2022, the market size for drones was estimated at $19.89 billion. It's anticipated to be a $125.9 billion industry by 2033. Today, the U.S. military is shoveling money to many small businesses, contractors, and startups tasked with developing drones. Many of these produced will sit in a warehouse and never get used, but the goal is to keep the innovation going by letting small companies come up with new ideas and approaches that aren't yet commercially viable due to the economics of scale. This approach, while seemingly inefficient at first glance, serves a strategic purpose. It fosters a culture of constant technological advancement and ensures that the military maintains some competitive edge in high-end drone technology that is produced entirely in countries that are deemed non-adversarial, not China. Wendover Productions has a great video on this topic if you'd like more information about it. So, are RC planes dangerous, considering how they've changed the literal outcome of wars? Sure, in the hands of government and militias. But there's another aspect to RC planes that a lot of the public doesn't know about. The radio-controlled hobby is a great source of recreation and fun for a large number of people. It sparks lifelong careers, especially for youth getting into it, and gives those folks who are older a less expensive way to enjoy aviation. In essence, the journey of RC planes and drones from curiosities and war tools to essential assets across various sectors emphasizes a remarkable evolution. This transformation has not only changed how conflicts are waged, but also how we approach agriculture, disaster management, conservation, and much more. It's clear that the impact of RC planes and drones extends far beyond their initial purposes. As these technologies continue to advance, their potential to support and enhance human efforts grows exponentially. Although, we still refuse to believe that everyone will be receiving Amazon packages by a drone one day. Time will tell. While it's easy to focus on the dangers and dramatic history of RC planes and drones especially, it's just as important to recognize the incredible potential they hold for positive change. They offer us a unique perspective, literally and figuratively, on our planet and our place within it. They remind us that innovation isn't just about the technology we create, but how we choose to use it. In the right hands, RC planes and drones are not instruments of destruction, but rather powerful tools for building a better, more sustainable and efficient world. Even if you disagree with us, one thing is indisputable. RC planes have changed the world forever and continue to do so. Special thanks to our channel supporters. Go ahead and give this video a thumbs up if you'd like to see flight tests awarded some military contracts. Or hit subscribe if you're interested in learning about China's anti-drone laser beam capable of penetrating 2mm steel from 4 clicks away. As always, happy landings, bounce one on for us, and we'll catch you next week with a new upload.